here we are measuring 3.5 inches off of this for our sign. It's going to be 3.5 inches square. I'm going to get my glasses on and make sure that my board is lined up right how I want it to make sure I cut right on that line. And there we go. Now I'm going to be sanding down the edges of the sign here, just trying to get a smooth finish on those sides so that it will look nice once it's painted. I'm using just some spray paint to paint the sign. You want to make sure you shake this really well before spraying, and then just try to apply a nice even coat. You're going to want to spray the top as well as the sides. Now I'm getting ready to make our file here. So I am in the Cricut design space and I'm going to text, and I'm going to type out the text I want and choose the font. So I'm actually going to use two different fonts for this sign, and here's the first font that I would like to use for the hello piece of this sign. I've put that in. Now I'm going to do a separate section here for the second word, and once I've got that, I'm going to change that to the font that I want that to be in. You can play around, there's tons of fonts in here. Now I see that I have a lot of space in between my letters, so I'm going to come up here to letter space and reduce some of that space. I don't want a ton of space, I want it to be more like one flowing word like that. Sometimes you need to play around with this a little bit. I'm actually going to ungroup these letters and manually place them where I'd like them to be. This just gives me a little bit more control in the space in between each individual letter. As you guys could see, when I had used the letter spacing tool, there was still more space in between some letters than others, and that wasn't really the look that I was going for. So this is sometimes a little bit tricky, getting your letters to line up exactly how you want. You can play around with it. It'll take a few tries to really get it to how you want to look sometimes, and that's okay. Once you've done that, you want to make sure to group your letters back together so that they all move. And I'm going to resize this and fit it to exactly how I want it to look with my other word. Now I'm going to select everything and align the centers so that they're perfectly aligned. Now that that's done, I'm ready to print. So I'm going to come up to the corner here and choose Make. And while my mat is loading, I need to check all of my settings here. That looks good. You want to check that your mat is to the correct size mat you're using and that mirror is turned off for this. And you're going to hit Continue here. Next, it's going to have you choose the material that you're using. You want to make sure you select vinyl. This is really important because it affects the pressure settings for your cut. Now that I've got my settings, I'm ready to place my mat into the machine. You want to make sure this is lined up just right, and then you will hit the flashing button. It will kind of set itself up, and once the Cricut button there flashes, you can hit that as well, and it will start your cut. My cut is complete, so the next step is to weed. I have my Cricut weeding tool here, and I'm going to pull out each letter. This makes the stencil that I'll be using to paint my sign. This is a really important step, and this is a little different for each type of material that you're using. So if I was using a different material, I might not weed the letters out, I might keep them. But for here, we're going to weed the letters out. Now that I've gotten all the letters out, I'm going to apply my transfer tape over the top of this stencil that I've made. I'm going to use my Cricut scraper tool. These come in a couple different sizes. There's an XL for larger projects, but this will be perfect for what I'm doing here. And I'm just going to make sure that everything is nice and flat down there, that nothing's sticking up, because that might affect once I put the paint on. Now I'm going to take my transfer tape, and there's a few different ways that people like to do this, but one of the most popular ways is to kind of fold it in half like this, and you're actually going to put it into the middle first, and then let both sides of it come down like that. Then you want to take your scraper tool again and just go over that and make sure that everything is really nicely stuck together there. This just helps when you're painting the sign, just makes it a little bit easier and won't bleed through as much. When I'm done with that, I'm going to peel the whole thing off of my mat here, and I'm going to get ready to place this onto my sign. Now I've got my sign here. I'm actually going to cut down this a little bit just to make it a little bit easier to put on. So I'm just going to trim that. It doesn't matter exactly how much. And now I'm ready to put this on my sign. So this part can be a little bit tedious. You need to make sure that all those little pieces, like the middles of the E's and your O's, don't come up. So it's usually easiest to do this on a flat surface and just go very slow. I've actually sped this up a little bit because I did this really, really slowly just to make sure that those little pieces don't come up, because that can ruin your whole sign if your O doesn't have a center. But there we go, that looks pretty good. Now I'm ready to place this on my sign. And I want to make sure that it's centered pretty well, so I'm kind of going to just play a little bit with this and make sure that my sides are even, make sure that it's on there straight, it's not crooked at all. You want to make sure that you get this pretty even before you push down at all on your stencil, because once you push down, it's really hard to get it back up, and you might end up having to just totally redo your stencil, which isn't a big deal, but you want to avoid that if you can. So this looks pretty good. I'm going to use my scraper again and just get it on there really well now that I'm happy with the placement. And just go slow. You don't have to do this really quickly. You really want to make sure that the back of your vinyl has really stuck to your sign. So you just want to make sure that it's on there really, really good. And when it is, you're going to peel off that top layer of that transfer tape. And this, again, you're going to want to do this really slowly and carefully. You don't want any of those extra pieces to come up. And the best way is really just to pull slowly right against your sign. So as you see, I'm not pulling in an upwards direction here. I'm really just pulling straight across as close to the sign as I can. And that's working really well for me. None of my middle sections of my O's or my E's has come up there. So now that I've got my transfer tape off, I'm going to take my scraper here and just make sure that this is on really, really well, that I didn't pull up any of those smaller pieces at all while I was taking off the transfer tape. And that looks pretty good, so I'm going to get my painting materials ready. To apply my paint, I'm actually going to use some makeup sponges. People use different things for this, but these makeup sponges work really, really well. These are actually from Dollar Tree, $1, and it comes with 28, so it lasts you a little while. But I'm just going to use this makeup sponge, and I'm using some chalk paint. This is my favorite brand of chalk paint. I'm using the sheepskin color for this particular sign, but they have this chalk paint in all kinds of colors. And I just find that this particular paint dries really well on signs. It doesn't crack or anything like that, and it's just very durable. So I'm just going to pour just a little bit of that out. I really don't need a lot of paint for this sign because it's very small. I'm ready to apply my paint here. I'm using just a very small amount of paint, and I'm going to just gently dab straight up and down over my letters here. You want to be very gentle as you're doing this. Really important not to go side to side as you do this, but to go up and down. If you go side to side, you're very likely to have a lot of bleeding with your paint bleeding through your stencil, and that's just going to lead to your sign not looking very good. So you're going to dab very carefully. You also want to make sure as you're doing this that your sponge isn't touching these outer layers where you're just having wood there. You want to make sure that your paint stays only on the stencil. So I've given myself a little bit of extra room here to do that. And as you can see, I'm being very careful not to get paint on those extra edges of sign there. If you do get paint there, it's okay. You can usually wipe it off, but it's just easiest to try to avoid those areas. And as you can see, I'm just putting a very small amount of paint on this at a time. You're going to want to do several layers of this, and it's better to do multiple really thin layers than to try to make a few less layers and make your layers more thick of paint. Doing it this way just helps to have your sign dry a little bit better, and it just makes your final product look better. When you glob on tons of paint, it can lead to a lot of cracking, it can make your sign take a really long time to dry, and it just overall doesn't look good. So you just want to make sure you do several layers and just go nice and slow. So now I've done my last layer and I'm ready to peel off my stencil. You want to be very careful when you're doing this, and again, just go really slow. So I'm just going to start at one of the corners and just gently start to peel back here. And like I said, it's really important to do this very slowly, because if you try to go too fast, you're pretty likely to end up smudging your paint, and you may end up having to start your sign completely over again, which nobody wants to do that. I'm actually going to let this dry a little bit before I try to take out these centers here. I don't want to mess up my paint or my lines by trying to take those out now, so usually let it dry for at least a few minutes before you try to do that. And here's how our sign turned out. If you enjoyed this tutorial, make sure to like and share this video. Leave us a comment down below if there's something you'd like to see next. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more crafting tips and tricks. See you next time!